It almost felt like a dream. I woke up to my dog Lucy barking. She was upright on the bed, where my husband and I were sleeping with our 22-month-old daughter. She was staring at our door like an unknown stranger was out there rummaging around. I thought she was just freaking out over a house noise. We'd only had her for 3 months at this point, and she was still a puppy. Really, she could have been barking at anything. Our roommate, a creak from the house setting, the awnings moving outside in the breeze. I wasn't too concerned initially. I decided the best thing to do would be to open the door and show her that nothing was there. It sounds a bit silly, but that's what we do with our daughter when she gets scared. And I figured it would work with a young puppy too. I opened the door and she raced to the front door. She stood there and did this gnarly, angry, and violent growl, one I had never heard her make before. I looked groggily at her and opened the baby gate blocking the doorway. I leaned over to open the door and show her that everything was okay. The second my hand reached for the deadbolt, though, Lucy went wild. She started barking and jumped towards me. When I touched the metal, she suddenly changed her temper. She whimpered almost like she was afraid of backing down. As her mannerisms changed, so did mine. I wasn't calm anymore. My heart was racing and sinking at the same time. I had been flooded with a mixture of fear and dread. I looked through the peephole. I can't explain why I decided to look, but as I did, I could see that outside were 2 children. One was only a smidgen shorter than I and didn't look much younger than I am. I'm 21, and this girl looked to be around 16 or so. She was slender and pale as well. Her hair was a shade of honey blonde. She wore it long, about mid-back, with long, thin, blunt bangs in the front that covered most of her face. She held the hand of a smaller girl who looked to be around the age of 4 or 5. She had the same style of clothing, jeans and a buttoned-down ivory cardigan. The smaller one looked down at the floor shyly. They had the same shade of hair tied back in a ponytail. Had it not been for the overwhelming dread and fear, I probably would have asked these children to come in, as well as given them a hot beverage to get them out of the bitter cold. Something about these 2 seemed off, though. I hadn't made any noise, hadn't hushed the dog or grumbled or nothing. I hadn't turned on any lights either. These kids had no indications that anyone was at the door, yet the older one spoke. She had a voice that was mature, confident, and strong. She held her head tilted downward, and I couldn't see her face really. "We have to use your phone, ma'am." I stood frozen in fear. How did she know that I was there? She raised her head to face me directly, and that's when I saw her eyes. There was a reason I couldn't see them through her bangs before. Her eyes appeared to be black, midnight blue, or another dark color indistinguishable in the darkness. Nonetheless, they were otherworldly. She told me, "Our mother is worried." As someone who's always been interested in creepy stories, I knew what this was the second she looked at me through the door. I had never been one to believe in these things, as a staunch atheist and skeptic. I had always written off many a ghost story from my family member and friends, eager to share their tales. I didn't believe, but I couldn't deny what my eyes were seeing. I was standing with nothing but a thin wooden door between me and a black-eyed kid. There was no questioning what was right in front of me. I didn't answer her. Slowly and silently, I backed away from the door, Lucy still cowering at my ankles. She kept talking. "Just let us in. We'll only use your phone." I took another step back. She'd seemed at first too polite, but when I took that second step back, she became commanding, almost hostile. "We're not going to hurt you. If we wanted to do that, we would have broken in by now. I'll ask you again. May we come in and use your phone?" Lucy snarled at the door as we inched backward. I went to my room and covered up the window. I locked the door and sat in the dim light of the nightlight. I heard the girl calling through the door once more. Then there was quiet. I didn't go back to sleep that night. and I haven't slept right since. I know from reading about BEKs that they don't come in without permission. I know there haven't been any reports of them hurting anyone either. But I fear I would have been the exception. This lingering feeling of sadness, this dread when my house is silent at night, this fear of a knock at the door tells me otherwise. This happened to me last night. I live in a sketchy neighborhood in an old house with 2 other roommates. One of my roommates was at work that night, and the other was with her boyfriend. That meant I was home alone. Normally, I'd stay up until about 2 or 3 a.m., but because I hadn't slept well the night before this happened, I crashed at around 12 this night. Since our house is old, it has a few defects. One of them is a front door which jams when it's locked and takes forever to unjam once it's unlocked. To avoid this, we just don't lock the door. This is clearly a dumb practice, but my roommate who's lived in this house for 5 years now claims to have never had a problem with anybody breaking in. At around 2 a.m. or so, I woke up and noticed a silhouette standing about 2 feet away from my bed. Whoever this was appeared to be a man about 6 feet tall, wearing a hoodie. He was holding his cell phone towards me with the flashlight on my face. My sleep-fogged brain tried to rationalize what the heck was going on. First, I thought maybe my roommate and her boyfriend had come home and needed something from me. I called out hello, and then remembered that my roommate's boyfriend was much shorter and more slender as well. It began to dawn on me that this person obviously was not supposed to be in my house. I started asking, "Who are you?" The man remained where he was, still watching me, taking pictures and recording me, or whatever the hell he was doing with his phone. I asked him again, and started to get up now. The man just turned around and briskly walked out of my room. I heard the front door close behind him as I tried to follow. By now, I was fully awake and freaking the fuck out. I frantically called my best friend Melody and told her what happened. She called the cops while I was on the phone with her. The cops came and took some fingerprints, but couldn't really go looking for the guy since I didn't have a good description of him at all, and they weren't able to get much evidence. They told me to call them if anything else happened, and then they left. Needless to say, I didn't sleep well for the rest of the night. When I was about 7 years old, my dad bought a few hundred acres in southern Mississippi, about 1.5 hours west of Mobile, Alabama. He built a small cabin on top of a hill that was in the middle of a large field surrounded by woods. This house was about 5 miles from a paved road to get to our land. It took nearly 10 minutes of driving down dirt roads from the main highway, which was south of the house. About a 1/4 mile north from the house, he had built a small lake, more like a pond really. It was about as long as a football field and slightly wider. To get to the lake from the house, you could take a route which was a hard-packed dirt road that was lined with dogwood trees. It was beautiful in the spring. Route B was about 100 yards east of Dogwood Lane. We named it Vampire Trail because it was always so gloomy. The trees blocked out the sun on the brightest days. It had a slight decline as you walked toward the lake. I say walked because this trail was definitely not for vehicles. Thick woods filled the area outside and in between both trails. One morning during the fall, my parents and little sister had gone to get ice cream and do some shopping. This trip would take them at least an hour. I was 10 years old. I decided to go fishing while listening to Bama play the game. The game was the usual Bama win, so I thought I would ease the boredom of a blowout by fishing in the well-stocked lake. I carried my pole and small radio, as well as my small ice chest. I had an Airedale Terrier named Bully that never left my side. It was on this day I realized how awesome he really was. Onto the lake we went. Picture a large oval roughly the size of a football shield but larger, with an eye-shaped pier in the southeast corner. Vampire Lane opened up to a more severe decline on the shore. Then the small pier across the lake on the west side. There was a narrow tree line that separated the shore from Dogwood Lane. The north side of the lake was the dam, and the south end ended in thick and swampy woods. Fortunately for me, I realized this later. 5 minutes after I threw out my line and 2 Bama touchdowns later, I got that feeling. It's a feeling I've come to recognize well, and it may have saved my life this day. The feeling of being watched by something dangerous. Bully was alerted too, because a few seconds later I could hear him growling low and staring across the lake to the west to the tree line that separated Dogwood Lane from our area. I turned my head in that direction. Almost immediately, my eyes lit upon what I thought to be a silhouette of a large man hiding behind a tree. It was too far to make out details, but close enough to be sure of what I was seeing. Almost 5 minutes went by, and right before I scolded myself for an overactive imagination, the half-silhouette moved behind the tree slowly. Bully stood his ground even louder, and I told him quietly to stop. I turned my head north towards the dam, while keeping my eyes and attention rooted to that tree. Over the next 10 minutes, which felt like hours, I watched while this figure slowly moved from tree to tree, always north, and always facing me. The saying "scared stiff" was something I found to be true in that moment. For some reason, I thought it important that whoever or whatever this was did not know that I was aware they were there. I finally realized that this thing's path was bringing it closer to the dam, which would in turn make its path to me shorter and easier. My paralysis broke, and I casually put down my fishing pole. I started to walk towards Vampire Lane. As an adult, I was in the army for 11 years as an MP, but not turning to look over my shoulder during that walk was the hardest thing I've ever done. In my mind's eye, whatever it was screaming across the dam towards me. When I hit the tree line, I broke into a run. As I was running, Bully dashed ahead of me. My anger turned into admiration as he stopped 20 yards ahead and faced north until I passed him. He continued this action the entire run home. My dog was watching my back. It was epic. Although I can grasp the awesomeness of this now, at the time I was so scared that I was literally sick. Even at such a young age, I knew that a large man watching and trying to creep upon a 10-year-old boy was no good. When I reached the cabin, I immediately locked the door and got one of my dad's shotguns as well as his .38 revolver. I sat at the large front window, my eyes glued to both trail openings and woods between them. My family returned shortly after, and for some reason I didn't mention what happened. I never felt safe there again. When me and my friends or my little sister wanted to go anywhere other than the area around the cabin, I made sure my parents were with us. What scares me the most, though, is the fact that our neighbors were about 2 miles northwest of us, with thick woods in between as the crow flies. Who or what was watching me from the woods that day, I guess I'll never know. Sometimes I wish I could go back to then as a grown man with military training, as I am now. Bully lived a full life and was put to sleep peacefully as a very old but great dog. The best dog I've ever known. So I just started dating my current girlfriend around a year and a half ago. I decided to take her to a small beach on a lake in a neighboring town. We went to talk and look at the stars. We left my house and drove to the lake, parked my car, and walked the 4th mile to the beach. We talked, laughed, and kissed for about an hour when I suddenly started to feel uneasy. This was quite strange, as I didn't usually feel this way. I looked up to the tree line on the beach, and would you look at that, there was a man standing near a tree, staring towards us. I didn't say anything yet, as to not scare my girlfriend. I kept watching him out of the corner of my eye and noticed he was inching closer. He was still 100 yards or more away when I saw the moonlight reflect off something in his hand. It took me a moment to realize this was a deer knife. I very calmly turned to my girlfriend and said, "We need to leave now." We started to walk quickly to my car. I glanced over my shoulder at the man 3 or 4 times, but he didn't seem to be moving towards the road where we'd parked. Finally, we jumped in the car. She asked me what all that was about. I told her there had been a man with a knife watching us, and began the drive home. About 2 minutes in, I called the police to give them a heads up about the man. I can't imagine what would have happened if I didn't notice him and get out of the area right away. This happened a few years ago when I was about 13. My best friend and I were at a lake in the middle of Georgia, trying to fight the almost 125-degree Fahrenheit weather. We decided to swim to our secret spot. It was really just a sort of cave made out of fallen tree roots. We did the routine snake check and swam in, climbing onto a rock to get inside. We started talking and gossiping, and all was normal until about 45 minutes later. We heard a truck pulling up and the sound of someone getting out. We guessed it was some people going fishing, since the lake was full of bass and other big fish. We started whispering, hoping the person wouldn't find our hiding spot. We heard the splash of someone getting into the water. We brushed it off again until we saw a man about 50 to 60 years old swimming over to our spot. We both looked at each other, but didn't move, frozen with fear. He came closer and started treading water about 3 feet away from the edge of our rock. He asked us our names, and we both replied with fake ones. We weren't entirely stupid. He told us they were pretty names, and then in the creepiest voice I ever heard, he looked us both up and down and whispered, "We have some very beautiful young ladies here. Someone like me could easily take advantage of you." He climbed up onto the rock. We then saw he was completely naked. We screamed as he lunged at us. We both dove away into the water. He managed to grab a hold of my friend's bikini top and ripped it off as she dived in. We were both fairly fast swimmers, and we hightailed it back to my friend's mom and explained what happened. While we were in the middle of explaining, the man swam up and started to walk towards us. That was until he saw my friend's mom was there. He quickly ran off into the bushes. His truck drove by a few minutes later, but we couldn't get the tag numbers because he was going so quickly. We called the cops, but from what I've heard, he was not caught. I haven't heard anything else about it since. I moved across the country, but this experience will likely never leave my mind. I'm a workout addict. I love to lift and run. I run about 12 miles a week typically, 3 miles 4 separate days. Every day that I run, I take the same trails that surround the lake in my hometown. These trails are relatively secluded. However, usually they have fellow runners and wanderers scattered throughout. That means there's usually people most times during the day and in the early evening. I always run a particular trail that's my personal favorite. It's very nearby my home, not even a half-mile away. This entire past week, my local gym was closed due to renovations, so I filled my week with about twice the amount of running as usual. I couldn't lift, so I had to get that extra exercise in somewhere. Because of my sudden increase in running though, my tendinitis flared up. I always get overzealous and tend to do that to myself. This will come back into play in a bit. Now, I'm hoping I'm able to describe this little picnic area and make some sense. At a certain point, the trail guides you to this adorable picnic scene. There are parking spaces and picnic tables equipped with grills scattered throughout the lakeside area. Families are always grilling here constantly. It's lovely. Behind a certain table, often one of the more secluded areas, there's a great little dirt trail leading to a lovely cliff overlooking the entire lake. I always loved to go out here alone since my childhood, as it's always been a rather safe area. I was finishing up what would be my last run before my tendinitis flare-up, forcing me to rest more or less. It was dusk, and I was just about to cross the adorable park and go onward through that trail towards home. When I hit the park, though, I stopped, thinking I might as well head towards my beloved hidden trail to take a brief rest on my favorite cliffside. I'm not one to be paranoid, and I'm quite adventurous. After many hours listening to these types of stories, though, I decided to maybe not. I picked up my speed when I noticed a van parked. There usually were people there, though, so I didn't think much of it. Maybe a fisherman. I moved along. Thanks to all that working out, though, the next day I had such brutal pain from overdoing it, I could hardly walk, let alone run. I took some time off that morning. I slept in late and woke up to a news update for my news app stating the police were investigating a burned and dismembered female body found at the lake just a few hours before I had woken up. I opened up the article to find the worst news. Where the body was found burned and gruesomely chopped to pieces was in my favorite trail, right between the picnic table and my beloved cliff, less than 1 mile away from my home. The area I run through 4 times a week, the same area where I almost explored just a day or so ago, as I had done since I was in elementary school. The same area that these kinds of stories created a paranoia of and averted me from visiting that evening with the sketchy gray van. They're still investigating, but nobody has been caught yet. I'm less than a mile away from there, sitting in my dark house, praying that whoever did this gets caught real fast. All I can say is how thankful I am to be safe and alive. I'm grateful for not being that poor soul to discover the body either, because that very easily could have happened to me. That's how much time I spend up there, and that's how close this all is to me. I still don't have a clue if that van truly was involved, but it seems very odd. Especially because I have a couple of friends who run in the same area, but stopped after weeks of seeing a gray van driving by each time they went out to run. So my family owns a cabin on a small lake in New Hampshire. We go there every summer. It's basically our home away from home. There are other houses on the lake, quite a few near us, but beyond that it's a pretty rural area. Miles of woods stretch beyond those lake houses, so there's really no reason to be in the area, unless you were hunting, staying in a lake house, or visiting the lake itself for whatever reason. So one night, maybe 6 years ago, it was pretty late, probably around midnight or so. My ex and I were just lying in bed, chatting about whatever. All of a sudden, we heard footsteps outside the open window. The window lays only about halfway up on the wall to the side of the bed. It was situated so that it opens right at the bottom of the bed where our feet are. The ground around my house is covered in a layer of pine needles that drop from above, so it's pretty hard to walk quietly around it. The footsteps sounded like whatever was making them was trying its very hardest not to be heard. They sounded relatively close by, too. We rationalized to ourselves that they were probably being made by some sort of animal. A couple of minutes go by, and we hear them again, except this time they seem much closer. They seem to be right outside the window, still trying to move quietly at this point. The two of us were starting to get a little bit freaked out. To our mutual horror, we look down and see a hand slowly coming through the window. Obviously, we screamed and woke up the entire house. My parents came running out of their adjacent room, and we told them what happened. My father just rationalized it as the event being a figment of our imaginations. To this day, I still don't know if he was right. The weird thing is, though, both my ex and I saw the exact same thing. How could it just be our imaginations when we were so in sync about all the details? I still feel uneasy staying in that room, and I always make sure the window is shut and locked before I go to bed. About 4 years ago, I was walking my dog around 9 to 10 p.m. It was the middle of summer, and the only time I could walk her was at night, so she wouldn't get too hot. My area is a very small suburb where nothing ever happens usually. People there are very friendly. I rarely see anyone else when I'm walking at night though. In my town, there's a small lake surrounded by woods, and there's a path that goes through those woods to lead around one side of the lake. It brings you out to a big clearing on the other side that's used as a park with picnic tables, benches, and lights on at night. You can see the clearing from the other side of the lake because of this. When you go first into the woods, there's a smaller clearing. My dog loved to walk on that path, so I decided to take her there. We get to the opening of the woods, where the path starts, when my dog stops dead in her tracks. I tug her leash a bit and tell her to come on, but she just won't move. She isn't sniffing or anything, just standing there looking out into the woods, looking scared with her ears back and her tail down. She did tend to get scared of little things, so I figured she'd heard a noise or something out there and was just overreacting. I kept trying to coax her to move. She'd glance at me when I called her, but for the most part, she was just frozen staring at the woods. Finally, I got her to go forward several steps very slowly. We were only a couple of feet from the entrance to the woods now, when she suddenly stopped again. I was getting more than a little annoyed with her. I looked down at her and told her to come on. I see that she's looking out towards the lake. Again looking frightened, I follow her eyes to the clearing on the other side when I see a figure sitting on top of one of the picnic tables. It's not unusual to see other people at the lake, although I'd never seen anyone at night before. The person I could see was dressed all in black, hood up with his back to us. I was fairly certain this was a man. I did get a little bit nervous, but I didn't really see it as a big deal. It wasn't that late, and other people like being out at night too, so it's not that weird. My dog was always friendly though, and never afraid of people. I was wondering what exactly was freaking her out here. I decided to keep walking through the woods, then cut to an area a little ways ahead where the trees weren't very dense. I called my dog quietly. She moved on another several steps, so we were in the middle of the clearing. It was pretty dark. There was just a street lamp from behind us adding some dim lighting to the area. My dog stopped again and looked back towards the man, then quickly turned around and started pulling to go back in the direction we came. She was very freaked out, tail tucked between her legs, ears back, panting hard. I looked back to the other side. The man was now facing me. He seemed to be looking right at me. I looked back at him for a few moments. Then, getting intimidated, I turned back to leave the woods the way we came. My dog was tugging so hard, I could barely hang on to the leash. She kept trotting ahead of me until we were about a block away from the woods. That was when she finally slowed down. We kept going for a few minutes when she suddenly got that same panicked look on her face. She turned and yanked me down a side street that was a shortcut to my house, going as fast as she could. I got an uneasy feeling. I looked back, only to see the man in all black on the street we'd just come from, watching us. He was standing there with his hands in his pockets, almost casually. He was smiling slightly. I turned around and didn't look back again. I started jogging towards my house with my dog. I let her leash go when we got to the driveway, and she took off running to the backyard. I still walked my dog at night after that. but I never took her back to that lake area except during the day. I had nightmares about that man for a while. It always unnerved me. Just how had he so quickly caught up to us? There are some shortcuts he could have taken to get to the other side of the lake without going all the way around the path, but he still made it there in just 5 minutes. He had to have run or something. I've never seen my dog so scared of a person, and I've never seen her like that ever since. This happened to myself and a close friend, both 23-year-old males, just last month. We decided to go on a 2-night backpacking camping trip in the Adirondack Mountains of New York. We were both very comfortable with nature and spent a lot of time camping, hunting, and fishing. We hiked about 5 miles up to a small lake and set up camp on a small beach that was not heavily trafficked. We didn't expect to run into anyone our first night there. As we were sitting around the fire, we saw a flashlight moving on the other side of the lake. It was at around 10:30. This was fairly unusual. However, we didn't give it too much thought. As time went on, though, this flashlight kept moving around the lake, getting closer and closer to our campsite. We kept discussing who could possibly be wandering around the woods in the middle of the night. We didn't particularly want an unwelcome guest. Once it was clear that the person or people were headed towards our campsite, we moved off into the woods nearby to see who would wander up. I took a small axe with me, and my friend had a .22 rifle. Now, we weren't expecting trouble, and we certainly didn't want to make any ourselves, but we figured we might as well cover our bases. Now, the moment of truth. The flashlight neared the light of our fire, and we could see it was a lone man. He had a beard and was probably in his mid-40s. The scary part was that he was carrying what turned out to be a pump-action shotgun. He walked around the campsite a few times, then proceeded to enter the tent. After rummaging around for a minute or so, he came out yelling, "I know you're out there. Why don't you come out and say hello to my friend here?" I remained motionless under a hemlock tree about 50 yards away. This is when the man proceeded to randomly fire his shotgun into the woods. It was not far from where we were. He also swung his flashlight around several times. After what felt like hours, he grabbed my friend's backpack and a few articles of clothing drying off near the fire and threw them in to burn. My friend trained the .22 at the man and asked if he should shoot him. I told him absolutely not unless he spotted us. He started to point the gun in our direction. Thankfully, the man moved off to where he had come from just a little while after. We waited until his flashlight was on the other side of the lake. We ran out and grabbed everything we could fit in my pack and took off soon after. It was now around 2 or 3 a.m. We ran out of the trail with flashlights and made it back to my car. The sun was coming up now. We immediately went to the police department and reported it, where we also spoke with some forest rangers. That was it. We haven't heard anything back from the police. It wasn't that mysterious. However, it made me feel fear that I had never felt before in my entire life. I recently moved into a big house just temporarily. It's kind of a complicated situation. The house belongs to a family member, and they were going to be gone for a few months on end. That sort of thing. I was going to be there all on my own. So obviously my first thought was, what if it's haunted there? There wasn't anything in the house when I moved in. There is now, though. I was in the main hallway unpacking some stuff when the doorbell rang. That put me on edge right away, because this house was at the end of a very long driveway, and it was really out of the way as well. You'd have to really go looking for it to find it. There was an old woman at the door. It was broad daylight, but there was still something kind of off about her. This woman was pretty tall, almost a full head taller than me. I thought there was something weird about the way she looked as well. It was like none of her clothes fit properly. She took my hand and smiled really wide. She told me she was from the neighborhood council or something like that, and asked if she could come in and talk to me. My gut reaction was to say no, but I couldn't really think of a reason as to why. After all, this was just an old woman. What was she really going to do to me? I wish I had just slammed the door in her damn face. I brought her into the living room, and she sort of tottered behind me, like her feet didn't quite fit into her shoes properly. She sat down without asking, and grinned at me until I took a seat across from her. For about half a minute, she didn't say anything. She just smiled and stared at me, while it got increasingly awkward. Just as I was about to break the silence, she fished in her pocket and pulled out this really big old-fashioned sweet, the types that come in that see-through wrapping. "Here you go," she said. Yes, I should probably point out here that she spoke really quietly, so it was difficult to hear anything she was saying. I accepted this sweet, kind of taken aback. I unwrapped it. It was dark red, almost black. I popped it in my mouth because she was still grinning at me, nodding her head back and forth. Have you ever walked around behind a supermarket where they keep those big bins? They throw out all the meat that's gone bad in those bins. Imagine that rancid smell, but on a hot summer day, so thick you can almost feel it in the air. That's what this sweet tasted like. I almost spit it out on the floor, but wanting to be nice made me chew the thing and force it down my throat. The woman was talking all the time, but between the taste and her quiet voice, I could barely hear what she was saying. My whole mouth tasted like rotten meat. I politely told her I was going to get some water and ran into the kitchen. When I came back, she was already gone. I had only been there for less than 30 seconds. My first reaction probably should have been to assume that she went to the bathroom or had to leave in a hurry. Instead, I searched the entire house. I went through every single room, convinced I was going to open a closet or look under a bed and see her stuffed in there grinning at me. That didn't happen, obviously, but I was still extremely on edge as the sun started to go down. I felt like I was turning off the light in my bedroom after spotting a giant spider in there. That night, I propped a chair against my bedroom door, because even though it didn't make any sense, I couldn't shake the feeling that woman was still in the house somewhere hiding. I woke up around 2 in the morning and heard creaking of floorboards downstairs. It was an old house and unfamiliar. I kept telling myself that until the noises stopped. When I woke up the next morning, though, there was a red sweet on the living room table. I'll tell you the same thing I told the police. No, I can't be absolutely certain the sweet wasn't there the day before. Maybe I had just overlooked it, but I didn't think so. They told me the organization the woman claimed to come from didn't actually exist, and clearly thought I was wasting their time. After they left, I searched the entire house again, and then the grounds as well. I searched them over and over. By the time I was finished, I'd managed to calm down a bit, and looked at the situation rationally. The woman probably left that sweet there the previous day, and I just hadn't noticed. I had searched the whole house twice by now. There was nowhere she could possibly be hiding. She was probably just some old lady who wandered off while I was in the kitchen. As I prepared to go to bed, I had managed to fully delude myself into thinking nothing strange was going on. I decided not to do anything childish like blocking my door, because what was I afraid of even? If she was somehow still inside the house somewhere, what was she going to do? At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up abruptly, knowing in the back of my mind that something was wrong. I guess I must have heard something in my sleep. I turned over onto my side and reached out to turn on the bedside lamp, groping around because I was in an unfamiliar room. When the light came on, I saw the old woman standing right next to my bed. I only got a brief glimpse of her though, because as soon as I screamed, she scuttled backward out the door really fast. I only got the briefest glimpse of her before she vanished into the unlit hallway outside my door. I now believe that the human brain has a special compartment for dealing with experiences far outside the realm of natural or something. If I had woken up to find a burglar in my room, I probably would have gone numb with panic. If there was a lion at the foot of my bed, I would have been too paralyzed with fear to do anything. But as soon as that woman was gone, that special compartment took over. I jumped out of bed, slammed the door shut, and shoved a chair against the handle. Then I dashed for my phone. No signal and no internet. I later found out there was nothing wrong with the phone or the local service at the time, so that woman must have been interfering with it somehow. The drop from the bedroom window wasn't too high if I landed just right. I would probably avoid injury, but what would happen if I sprained my ankle or broke my leg? I suddenly had a vision of pulling myself across the dark garden while the woman sprinted after me. I decided I didn't want to risk it. That gave me two options: wait out the night in my bedroom or try to get out of the house right now. I went for the second one. I was thinking this flimsy barricade wouldn't hold if this woman decided she wanted back in. I broke one of the chair legs off and crept slowly into the hallway, reaching carefully around for the light switch. When I pressed it, the lights came on for a second, then faded out. I flicked the switch a few more times, noting some gut instinct that told me she must have sabotaged them in some way. I used my phone for light. As I slowly and quietly crept along the upstairs hallway and down the stairs, the light barely traced the shapes of the walls and the dark yawning frames of open doorways. I jumped at every single shadow and unidentifiable shape. I was certain that at any second that grinning face would appear from the shadows. I got downstairs to the front door. I had double-locked it and put the chain in place. Just as I was reaching for the first lock, I heard rapid, uneven footsteps at the top of the stairs, approaching swiftly. I undid the first lock, and as I did so, a high-pitched shriek came from the hallway. I screamed as I undid the second and wrenched the door open. It stuck fast. I had forgotten the chain. I glanced behind me and saw the tall, spindly shape of that woman, half running and half falling down the stairs towards me. She had lolled her head backward, and her mouth was hanging open with her tongue sticking out. I can't even remember getting the chain off. I might have actually just yanked the door open so hard it broke. In any case, the last I saw of that woman, her face was mere feet away from me. As I slammed the door shut, I sprinted to the nearest house. They eventually called the police. Possibly because I was half delirious with fear and babbling incoherently, the police once again failed to find anything unusual. It's been a week. I'm staying at a friend's place, sleeping with the lights on and the bedroom door barricaded. The house's real owners aren't back yet. I'm not sure what I'm gonna tell them, but I have to stop them from going back there somehow. It's definitely not a haunting. I can't stop thinking about all the holes in our defenses, the windows and doors we carelessly leave open, the strangers invited into our living rooms. I hope to God it's just the house that woman wanted, and not me in particular. I'm a female, and at the time I was approximately 18 or 19 years old. My youngest brother was in 8th grade and was due to be confirmed at the end of the year. For those of you who are unaware of what that is, it's a ceremony performed in Catholic elementary schools that sort of confirms your faith and dedication to the religion before sending you off to high school. For this ceremony, the person being confirmed has to have a sponsor that's 18 years of age or older and also has to be Catholic themselves. Therefore, my brother chose me. Personally, I had moved on from Catholicism, as I did not agree with a lot of what I had learned. I accepted my brother's request, though, as it was very important to him. Fast forward to the day in which my brother was being confirmed. As a sponsor, my role was significant but fairly short-lived. From what I can recall, we simply placed our hands on their shoulders while they made their promise to God and the religion itself, and promised to support them on their journey. I may be missing a few minor details, but that's the basic gist of it. Thus, after our portion is complete, they request that we leave the stage and join the crowd to watch the remainder of the ceremony. Due to the fact that the church was quite packed, my family was standing along the back wall. I walked off the stage and through the crowd to join them. There was not much left in the ceremony at this point, so it ended quite quickly. The students and priests began to leave the stage. They had to venture around the crowd, thus walked along the walls, as opposed to going through the middle. That day, I was wearing a bluish-colored high-neck blouse, a black knee-length skirt, and gray nylons that had a black velvet rose pattern on it. As I mentioned, my family were up against the back wall of the church, preparing to move ourselves out of the way to make room for all these students and priests that were making their way towards us. We congratulated them all as they passed by and began saying our hellos to the priests as they made their way towards us. The very last priest in the line, though, looked to be about 80 years old or so, stopped dead in his tracks while in front of where I was standing. The priest then proceeded to slowly look me up and down twice with a very unnerving smile on his face. Following this, he leaned in and whispered the words, "I like your pantyhose." I was immediately on edge and moved in closer to my family. He continued to follow the line after a few minutes. My mom turned to me and asked me if I was okay. She saw the expression on my face, and I advised her as to what had just happened. She was completely disgusted. My mother thought about saying something, but I advised her not to do so, as I didn't want to ruin my brother's day. She reluctantly agreed. As soon as we were able to, we made our way out of the church and decided at that moment we were never going back. I'm a fairly uninteresting man in my late 20s, with a stable job and a happy family. I've never once entertained the notion that I might one day be the target of a stalker. So here's my story, as a warning to everyone. You don't have to be a pretty young lady to catch the eye of a crazy. I don't know if this will make sense, but I'm a habitual yet very casual Facebook user. I don't post a lot, but I do check my news feed very often. One Saturday night, I was doing a quick round before I went to bed when I received a friend request. I accepted it without hesitation. Just about every friend request I received gets accepted, because I don't post anything very personal, and I don't have any information on there either. As I said, I have a very casual approach to social networking. I do a quick glance on the profile that had befriended me, and saw it was obviously a fake account. Not thinking much about it, I put my computer away and fell asleep the next day. I was having lunch at a friend's house, having completely forgotten about the friend request from the night before. My phone buzzed, and I saw I had gotten a message from a coworker of mine named Maya. Although Maya and I worked together and had a few mutual friends outside of work, we didn't communicate much other than when it was about work itself. I checked it, assuming it was work-related. I guess looking back, you can say it sort of was. I get the gist of it though. The Facebook account that had befriended me was also friends with Maya, and had bombarded her with accusations and insults of being a bitch and a slut and every other name in the book. The person took it a step forward as well by messaging Maya's husband and saying she was cheating on him with me. Maya wanted to know if I knew who this person could be. I explained to her how I accepted every friend request and had no idea who this possibly was. I then proceeded to unfriend the profile in question. Maya explained to me that she already had some suspicions on who it was and just wanted to see if I could confirm. Let's rewind a few weeks earlier. I had received a friend request from a girl named Carrie. It struck me as odd because although we worked at the same place, we'd never actually met or even spoken a single word to each other, not even made eye contact. We worked in completely different departments. I had to walk through her area to get to our lounge, but that was the furthest extent of our interactions. In fact, I only learned her name when she added me on Facebook. I recognized her picture. I'm not sure how she found out about my name. Carrie had also friended my wife and subsequently started sifting through my wife's posts and photos, liking and commenting on several of them. She began interacting with a few things I'd posted as well. She talked as though we were the best of friends. I would walk by her as usual at work and still had no interaction. I found this odd, but I didn't think too much of it. The mysterious Facebook account continued to harass Maya until she told the person that she knew it was Carrie and was going to call the police. I thought that would be the end of things, but I was very wrong. Over several weeks, I began getting more friend requests from girls looking to hook up with me. Obviously, I knew they were all fake, and for the most part, I ignored them. I also began getting notifications from different accounts about suspicious activity on my profile. Most of the time, it was warnings for failed login attempts. I specifically remember one said my Facebook account had been logged into from somewhere unusual and asked whether or not it was me. I should have been more concerned, but for some reason, I didn't really care that much. That's pretty stupid. Even after that, I didn't bother to change my password. At the time, I viewed all these activities as random isolated incidents. I had no valuable information on there anyway, and I didn't have any private secretive messages, so what harm could a potential hacker do? A few months passed when one day my wife gets a message from Carrie stating she had a high-end video camera and was looking to start some amateur filming. She wanted to know if we would help her by letting her film our family for a day. Remembering what Maya had said about her, I was reluctant. I wanted to give Carrie the benefit of the doubt though, so we agreed to tell her that we would schedule a time for whenever we weren't busy, and left it at that. Once again, I had yet to actually meet Carrie. More weeks passed by and we'd obviously completely forgotten about scheduling with Carrie. She messaged me about it, and I apologized about forgetting, then turned her down when she asked to reschedule. I was feeling very uneasy about this whole thing. Then things got weird. She started to send gifs of stick figures doing sexually suggestive motions. I didn't respond. She asked, "Funny, isn't it?" I immediately texted my wife to log into my Facebook profile to observe the messages. Not wanting to be rude, I agreed and carried on the conversation. She proceeded to send me old photos from my abandoned MySpace account that I had completely forgotten about. It was around this time when MySpace had been revamped and a lot of people lost a lot of cherished memories. Somehow she dug up all my old stuff though and decided to share it with me. Things escalated quickly from there. She began talking about her body and how she wasn't attractive, trying to bait me into complimenting her looks. I wasn't falling for it though. She hit me with something out of the blue. She asked me about my dick and suggested it was probably really big. I decided enough was enough. I stopped responding. My wife was reading the whole time, and we were kind of texting back and forth about how funny and weird this girl was. I continued to go to work and still awkwardly never actually met her. I especially didn't want to strike up any conversations. After that, Carrie messaged me one final time asking me for a favor. Maya had blocked her profile, and Carrie suspected she was saying bad stuff about her, so she wanted me to spy on her a bit. I confirmed to her I was not going to do this for her, and that I would leave this just between us. I did check though, just to see for myself. I know Maya couldn't care less than to waste her time talking about Carrie. Around this time, my wife started getting texts from an unknown number. The person knew her name and was trying to remain anonymous. They were also trying to flirt with her. We were with a bunch of friends at the time, and we all thought it would be funny if we all text flirted with this person. Once again, I never thought to connect any of these occurrences. Carrie eventually quit work, and I continued to get suspicious activity that I stupidly continued to write off. I had pretty much forgotten all about Carrie. Then, I would say over a year later, my wife dropped a bomb on me. A good friend of ours started texting my wife, saying I was sending very inappropriate messages to them on Facebook. I had been busy running errands all day though, and hadn't really checked my account at the time. When I tried to, I found my password had been changed. When I finally managed to get back in, all my messages had been cleared. I had no idea what had actually been said until I started hearing from more people. Apparently, I was being very suggestive and nasty to them. The thing was, these were not random women on my friends list. They were all targeted at women that were close to me, good friends, my wife's sister, my friends' wives. These messages weren't holding back either. They went completely all-out graphic in detail about what I wanted to do to them. Everybody felt completely violated and humiliated. I couldn't imagine how the woman felt. My wife and I were really close to our families and friends, and every other week or so our friends would get together and drink, barbecue, watch movies or sports, and hang out. We had several families over and told them about what happened. They said they understood, and they knew it wasn't really me. I could see deep down, though, they felt it was a possibility that it really was me. Over time, more and more of them stopped coming over, to the point where my home started to feel empty. I confided in my wife about how I felt they all thought it was really me, and she said I was just being paranoid. She argued that my friends were just busy with their lives and would eventually come over again. I learned that someone had created a Facebook account using my name and picture and continued harassing the same woman. Some of them posted a picture of the conversations with me on Facebook. She commented it really could be me because that mystery person talked just like me, using the same vocabulary. She also stated that the person knew my friends and family extensively. My heart instantly shattered after reading that. I quit checking my Facebook for the longest time. I guess I fell into a mild depression. I felt miserable and told my wife I wanted to disappear. I strongly considered quitting my job of 7 years and moving away to start over. I know now I was being quite irrational, and thankfully my wife stayed strong for me through it all. I felt I needed to defend my honor and started gathering alibis of times, people, and places I was around during the time of many of those messages. My wife brutally told me she couldn't believe I was weak enough to let a no-life dumbass on Facebook put me down and make me feel that way. I guess that's true. I am and always have been a mentally strong person. I always look for the best in a bad situation, but for some reason this affected me differently. I can't explain why, but I felt extreme shame and guilt for something I didn't even do. Without my wife knocking me back to reality, I don't know what would have happened. We advised our friends to just ignore this person, and eventually everything stopped. From time to time, I still get random friend requests, but I don't accept them anymore. I don't have any proof that this was all the work of Carrie. It all just happened during a time she injected herself into my life. My friends have started coming over again, but it hasn't felt the same ever since. I don't know if it's them or just in my head. My wife and I came to the conclusion that Carrie reveled in the misery of others. After tormenting Maya, she moved on to and targeted me, trying to ruin my marriage and distance me from my friends. She did this for no reason, other than the fact she enjoyed doing it. I'm pretty sure she hasn't stopped. She left me alone only because she found a new victim to harass. When I was 15 years old, I started a live journal account. At the time, a lot of my friends were also using the platform. It was basically early social networking, where people with similar interests would come together and read each other's blogs. I had only been posting for a short while when a guy began to comment on all my entries. He said his name was John. It really should have made me more suspicious that there was a grown man trying to reach me through the internet. He claimed he knew my friend Dale, who was 2 years older than me. We attended the same high school. I contacted Dale and asked him about John, to which he replied, "Oh yeah, John's awesome. We met on LiveJournal." He talked the guy up like he was super cool and I should totally interact with him. John continued to leave comments on my journal frequently, but in addition to that, he began to email me as well. One of the first things he sent me was a screenshot of his computer desktop where he had assembled a collage of pictures of me. He had copied them from my LiveJournal account, which made me super uncomfortable. I told Dale about this, but he just laughed it off, saying John was just fucking with me. I decided to let it slide because I trusted Dale. After about a year of awkward emails from John, a woman named Jillian contacted me. She claimed to be John's sister. There was some made-up convoluted story about how they weren't actually siblings but were raised together. I can't really remember all the details. She began to send me extremely vicious messages though, followed up almost immediately by apologies every time. She would talk to me like I was a puppy, saying cutesy shit like, "Darling, how precious." It was about a week after that I began to suspect that Jillian didn't exist at all and was simply a creation of John's to further harass me, maybe make himself look better. Shortly after that, John began sending me interracial porn constantly and made extremely racist comments about them. That was enough for me. I blocked both him and Jillian. In retrospect, it was right about then I should have informed authorities. John eventually found a way to contact me with another email address. I'm not sure how. Maybe Dale told him. He tried to apologize for his behavior, but I just ignored him. I'd had enough of this craziness. Around this time, Dale moved to another city with two of our mutual friends, one of whom I've kept in contact with. He warned me that Dale and John had started talking a lot on the phone, and he suspected John was supplying Dale with pot because Dale had started smoking constantly. The idea that Dale and John were becoming so close made me very uneasy. Dale knew my home address, phone number, and all kinds of other personal information. Shortly after, my discomfort was validated when I received an email from John stating he was visiting my hometown soon. He intended to swing by. I emailed him back and told him that if he ever contacted me again, I would go straight to the police and press charges against him for harassment. I had saved every email I ever got from him or Jillian. Shortly after, I received a call from Dale. Apparently, he had received a call from John, who was enraged after I sent him that email. I decided I had to cut Dale out of my life as well. He had become untrustworthy and was letting his own life fall apart. All he ever did was smoke pot and play video games, mooching off his roommates and other friends for money and food. After a few months, his roommates kicked him out after an incident occurred at their apartment where someone tried to break down the door looking for Dale, who owed them money. Apparently, having nowhere else to go, Dale moved in with John, who turned out to be a 50-something-year-old trucker. Obviously, he didn't have a sister named Jillian. Turned out John wasn't even his real name. As far as I know, they're still living together to this day. I have no idea what motivated John to keep contacting me. I just know I dodged a bullet. Had I been less receptive or less cautious, he may have drawn me into his web of drugs and lies and ruined my future. Sometimes I do feel bad for Dale, but honestly, it's his own dumbass fault. I do hope that someday he turns his life around. I know John and I never officially met, but as far as online communications go, I hope I never receive another email from this deranged man again.